Everyone has an opinion about Gen Z. Lazy, addicted, fragile. You're told you have the attention span of a goldfish, that you're addicted to your phone, that you're too sensitive, too anxious, too entitled, a generation that got participation trophies and somehow still ended up fragile. But here's what those people are missing. Every single trait that gets weaponized against Generation Z, the distraction, the detachment, the burnout, is not a flaw in your character. It's a perfectly rational adaptation to one of the most psychologically demanding environments any generation has ever had to survive. Today, we're not going to talk about what's wrong with Gen Z. We're going to talk about what Gen Z reveals about the human nervous system, about economics, about community, and about what it actually looks like when a generation refuses to lie to itself. Let's start with the attention span myth, because it's probably the oldest insult in the drawer. Yes, research shows that younger people switch between tasks and screens more rapidly than previous generations. But the framing that this represents some kind of neurological decay gets the science completely backwards. In cognitive psychology, there's a concept called continuous partial attention. It was coined by former Apple and Microsoft executive Linda Stone, and it describes something very specific: the state of keeping a low level, wide aperture awareness of your entire environment while simultaneously processing a foreground task. This is not distraction, this is surveillance. It's the mental posture of someone who grew up in an information ecosystem, where a global pandemic, a school shooting, a financial crash, or a viral piece of misinformation could appear between one TikTok and the next. Your nervous system learned, correctly, that no single source of information is ever the whole story. So, it keeps scanning. What looks like an inability to focus is actually a highly sophisticated filtering mechanism. The question your brain has learned to ask constantly is, does this deserve my full attention? Most things don't. And you've become extraordinarily good at knowing the difference. That's not a disorder. That's calibration. Now let's talk about work, because nothing has generated more hot takes per square inch than the concept of quiet quitting. For those outside the conversation, quiet quitting doesn't mean not working. It means refusing to work beyond what you're paid to do. It means declining to emotionally invest your entire identity into a job that, statistically, will offer you no pension, no housing security, and no guarantee of loyalty in return. Previous generations were sold a psychological contract: work hard, be loyal, and the system will take care of you. For baby boomers, that contract was largely honored. You could graduate, find a stable job, buy a house, and retire. The promise was real enough to believe in. So, emotional investment in your career made sense. It was rational. But Gen Z inherited a fundamentally different landscape. They came of age during the 2008 financial crisis, the gig economy, decades of stagnant wages, a housing market permanently out of reach for median earners, and a student debt crisis that financialized the very act of trying to improve your situation. The promise wasn't just broken, it was never made to them in the first place. So, when a generation responds by setting clear limits around their labor, that's not laziness. In clinical psychology, this maps almost perfectly onto what researchers call a rational defense mechanism: the mind's instinct to protect itself from a relationship that has already proven itself exploitative. Quiet quitting isn't giving up on work. It's refusing to have a parasocial relationship with a corporation. And that, frankly, is the healthiest possible response to a broken economic promise. Here is perhaps the deepest psychological contradiction of Gen Z's experience. You are, by measurable definition, the most connected generation in human history. You can video call someone in Seoul, join a Discord server with 10,000 members, and feel the emotional weight of a stranger's grief in real time. The entire world is always reachable. And yet, something is profoundly neuroscientifically missing. What's missing is what sociologists call third spaces, the informal, physical, unmonetized places where community forms. The barbershop, the corner cafe, the park where people just are together without an agenda or a subscription fee. These spaces have been quietly hollowing out for decades, replaced by algorithm curated feeds, reduced by rising rents, restructured out of suburbs built around cars instead of people. The neurological toll of this is real. Human brains are wired for what neuroscientist John Cacioppo called co-regulation, the subtle, largely unconscious process by which our nervous systems attune to the physical presence of other people. A shared meal, an accidental eye contact, the sound of a crowd in a park. These are not luxuries. They are the biological raw material of belonging. Digital connection, as rich as it can be, activates different neural pathways. It can create meaning, it can create community, but it cannot fully substitute for physical co-presence. And the loneliness epidemic that research has identified most acutely in Gen Z is not a personal failure. It is the predictable neurological consequence of building a society that monetized connection while dismantling the infrastructure for it. So, let's say it plainly, your attention isn't broken, it evolved. It learned to survive an information environment that no previous generation had to navigate, and it did so by becoming one of the most sophisticated filtering systems ever developed by a human nervous system. Your relationship to work isn't lazy, it's lucid. You looked at a contract your predecessors trusted, saw the fine print, and said, I will not pay with my soul for something that was never going to pay me back. Your loneliness isn't weakness. It's the honest signal of a nervous system that knows what it needs: real presence, real community, real belonging, and refuses to gaslight itself into thinking a notification is the same thing. The generations before yours were, in many ways, spared from having to see the machine clearly. They could afford the comfort of belief. You were not given that comfort, and so you see it all: the contradictions, the systemic failures, the gap between what was promised and what exists, with a clarity that is, at times, genuinely painful. But clarity, even when it hurts, is never something to pathologize. What the world calls your anxiety is often just honesty. What it calls your detachment is often just discernment. And what it calls your crisis may very well be the beginning of something the rest of us desperately need: a generation that refuses to pretend the world is fine, and precisely because of that refusal, might be the one that actually changes it. You are not broken. You are adapted.